Survival Special.
Imagine a safari that starts on the equator, over some of the highest mountains in Africa, the legendary Mountains of the Moon. A journey that follows great rivers of ice down over 12,000 feet through a vegetable kingdom seemingly gone berserk. A safari that goes up the headwaters of the Nile and along the edge of the Ituri, Africa's largest and most exciting rainforest. That follows the Great Rift Valley south, crossing a lake fertilized by 30,000 hippos, where the waters are so rich that when insects hatch from the surface, it looks as if the lake itself is on fire. A lake fed by rivers and streams that flow down from a chain of magnificent volcanoes. Some of them extinct now, covered in lush and fragrant forests, the home of the world's last mountain gorillas. Others grumbling, steaming, and active. Sounds like an epic journey, a safari the length and breadth of Africa. But in fact, all this natural splendor is not just in one country, Zaire, it's all in one national park. Its name should be as familiar as the Serengeti or Yellowstone, but this park is almost unheard of. Named for the fiery volcanoes that mark its southern end, this is Virunga. Mountain gorillas are the best known of Virunga's animals, and it was for them that the park was originally created. In 1921, the American taxidermist Carl Akeley came to the Belgian Congo to collect a group of gorillas for the New York Museum of Natural History. He was so impressed by the beauty of the region that he came back 4 years later and persuaded the Belgian king to create a national park. And for that, the world will always be in his debt. Originally, the park covered just the volcanoes, but thanks to Akeley's vision and persuasion, the borders were extended 100 miles north to the very top of the Mountains of the Moon. And on a clear day, it is possible to see as far as Akeley did way back then. The Ruwenzori's rise out of the middle of Africa like the exposed vertebra of some gigantic fossil. They're not the highest mountains in Africa, but with 20 peaks of over 15,000 feet along a 70-mile spine, they are by far the most spectacular. Moist air rising from the hot rainforest below produces mists that hide the peaks for most of the year, and several expeditions passed by before Stanley saw them in 1888 and reported back to the west that the legendary Mountains of the Moon, the mythical source of the Nile, really did exist. This moisture also produces uniquely hard ice, so that the many glaciers are fringed with cornices of huge icicles, each one dripping its tiny contribution to Africa's mightiest river. When the mist does lift, the equatorial sun pours down relentlessly. The climate has been described as winter every night and summer every day. And in these extreme conditions, plants have been more successful than other life forms. In fact, they have run riot. These giant lobelias and ground sols are the big game of the vegetable kingdom. On these high slopes, plants have resorted to many devices to cope with the extreme conditions. Their leaves are often silvery to reflect the strong sunlight, but at the same time furry to insulate them from the cold. Some species close their leaves tightly at night to keep warm. Others produce their own antifreeze. The old leaves do not fall, but fold back to wrap the trunk in a thick, shaggy duvet. By mastering these conditions, plants have made it possible for other creatures to live here too. A scarlet-tufted malachite sunbird sits on the 10-foot flowering column of a giant lobelia. The feathery insulation protects the deep blue flowers which provide the sunbird with nectar. Other plants trap water in their leaves, and because it does not freeze there, it offers a place for insects to breed, providing some protein to go with the sugars supplied by the flowers. This otherworldly plant life of the Ruwenzori's changes with altitude and consequently temperature. Between 15 and 12,000 feet, the alpine zone is filled with real-life triffids, silvery everlasting flowers, and 20-foot lobelias and groundsols, like monstrous cabbages on the march. On down to 10,000 feet, through forests of giant heather, orchids and mosses that might have inspired Tolkien. A zone the Africans call the place of the beards. Another 2,000 feet down, and this elfin forest gives way to bamboo, and finally to trees of a more familiar shape and size. Here there is more animal life. Often forms unique to the Ruwenzori's. Their colors muted in the ever-present mist, but occasionally flashing in a shaft of sunlight. The storms over the Mountains of the Moon spawn hundreds of streams that spill down into the Semliki River, the westernmost tributary of the mighty Nile. Some rivers cut down through soft rock, creating a vast maze of sandstone. On its journey through the Virunga Park, the Semliki skirts the great Ituri rainforest, meandering through hundreds of square miles of palm trees. Here, as on the mountains, plant life predominates, but here too are some strange and special creatures. These oil palms attract one of them, a large bird of prey that is uniquely a vegetarian, the palm nut vulture. On the savannah, it eats carrion, but here its main food is oil palm nuts, whose bright pigment puts color in the bird's face. The birds feed early in the morning, and the sound of falling nuts attracts an African civet who was sleeping in a nearby thicket. Civets are very poor climbers and could never get up to the nuts, so this manna from above is welcomed. Like the vulture, he eats only the thin outer skin of the nuts, which are rich in oils and highly nutritious. The civet eats almost anything: fruit, insects, rodents, birds' eggs, and snakes. The civet's usual technique is to bite the snake in the body and shake violently until it's beaten to death. But the raised hood of this forest cobra inhibits him, and he misses his chance for a body bite. Though a close relative of the mongoose, the civet has none of that animal's incredible speed or agility. Too slow to catch the head, he needs an unguarded length of body. The cobra is not going to give him an opening. When the risks obviously outweigh the reward, only a desperately hungry predator would persevere. The civet moves on. The Semliki flows for miles through these forests of palm trees. They supply food to a host of creatures, monkeys, squirrels, and birds. They also provide the setting for one of the world's strangest nesting systems, that of the palm swift. Using their own saliva, the birds glue a tiny pad of feathers onto a palm frond. The pad is vertical, so the eggs too are glued on with saliva and dangle precariously in space. The swifts, about the weight of a pound coin, and with a wingspan of over a foot, are perfect flying machines. They land only to sleep or when nesting. To incubate, the female must cling on to the nest pad with her claws, pressing her belly up against the eggs, then dropping away into flight when she needs to feed. For the swifts, there is nothing romantic about waving palms. They usually lay 2 eggs, and one or both are often lost on windy days, but at least the eggs are glued into place. The newly hatched chick has no such help. For 24 hours a day, this thimble-sized creature must hang on to the pad with its tiny claws or fall to a certain death. Dredging the skies for insects at 80 miles an hour, the parents visit the nest some 20 times a day to regurgitate food for the chick. On this rich diet, its tiny flippers will soon grow into an adult's sweeping scimitar wings. After a month of hanging in and hanging on, having never exercised its wings, the chick will one day let go and drop into instant expert flight. As we journey down through the park, the glaciers and snowfields fade into their mists, the rainforest thins out and slowly gives way to savanna. Still following the shining Semliki, we come to one of the world's richest lakes, home to 30,000 hippos. Lake Edward is the gateway to the volcanoes, the fiery heart of Virunga. Nestled against the western wall of the Great Rift Valley, the waters of this lake are the setting for a strange spectacle. At the beginning of the rainy season, the mosquito-sized lake flies hatch in dense black clouds that look like oil fires. Countless millions of them rise from the surface, providing a huge feast for birds and fish. One of the reasons for this lake's great richness is hippos, and they are everywhere. Along the lake shore, in all the streams and waterholes, and in the mud. Hippos spend most of their daylight hours like this. Hairless and large-bodied, they would soon overheat without mud or water to wallow in. In some places in Virunga, this necessary habit becomes decorative too. Along the banks of the Rutshuru River, deposits of fine white clay enable hippos to indulge in body painting on an epic scale. Facials, two-tone jobs, and even racing stripes are on show. And all are easily washed off by just slipping into the water. In the northern part of the park, plants are the kings, the giants of mountain or rainforest. Here in the center of Virunga, the hippo is king. There are 30,000 of them, and their influence is everywhere. Their wallows and tracks modify the lake shore and river banks, Their huge quantities of dung enrich the waters, supporting a pyramid of insects, fish, and birds. Hippos totally dominate the ecology here, but not with these huge teeth. They are for fights among themselves. In true 90s fashion, they maintain their authority with this great big smile. Hippos graze with these sharp-edged lips. They cut a 2-foot swathe and crop the grass very short, too short for their main competitors, elephant and buffalo, to utilize. Grazing in huge numbers, hippos have created hundreds of square miles of lawns, excluding many of their rivals from this rich lakeside grass. But hippos have delicate muzzles. A few thorny twigs will prevent any grazing, allowing bush thickets and long grass to invade the lawns, providing food and cover for bushbuck and buffalo. And elephants, who also feed on the reeds that the hippos do not use. So the hippos influence both land and water, and because of them, Virunga is a richer, more varied place. Another reason for variety is that here the forest meets the savanna, so there is an overlap of species. There are 2 types of buffalo here, who often herd together. The Cape buffalo, big and black with wide and heavy horns, and the forest buffalo, small and reddish with horns better shaped for getting between trees. The hippo's influence on the vegetation ends a couple of miles from the shoreline. Beyond that point, below the Rift Valley wall, another creature holds sway, an antelope, the Thomas's cob. Here, on a traditional mating ground called a lek, the finest males concentrate to compete for mates. Uncomfortably spaced, less than 50 yards apart, each male poses conspicuously, a living billboard for himself. This is the testosterone zone. And on her day of estrus, a female arrives to choose a mate. All the males on the lek are above average specimens, but the strongest, the most desirable fathers for her offspring, are those with the most central territories. To get to them, she must run the gauntlet of the lesser males and avoid being mated by one. She gives them the slip, but as she gets closer to the center, the males become higher ranking and their attentions more persuasive. But she has her sights on something better. Again, she makes a break. And this is who she is after, an alpha male who greets her with a fine display of superiority. This time, she mates willingly, and it's all over in seconds. Such male privileges come at a price. These core territories are won and kept by fierce fighting. couple of weeks is about as long as any male lasts on one of these prime sites. Then, weakened by the stress, he will be forced out and replaced. The females don't care who he is, just where he stands. So the system provides the best possible fathers for the next generation of cob. To the south, the Virungas, the volcanoes that give the park its name, are now the dominant feature, and the effect of their inner fires is felt throughout the area. Hot springs emerge in many places, and just as there was life on the Ruwenzori's at freezing point, so there is life in this boiling chemical brew. Algae flourishes here, and as the vegetation changed with temperature on the mountains, here too the algae changes as the water grows cooler. Some animals, especially rheumatic old males, enjoy a hot mud wallow, and these hippos have moved as close to the spring as is comfortable. Reptiles work more efficiently when they are warm, so a morning visit to the springs gets a monitor lizard quickly up to operating temperature. But experience and caution are needed. This younger, less experienced monitor went in too close to the source and was boiled. The springs are a dangerous place for visitors. For residents, life must be a series of small and careful moves, not easy if you're a jumper. Threatened by a hunting rhinoceros viper, the frogs will have to make more than cautious hops. What's needed now are great leaps of faith. There are only a few spots where the water is fatally hot, and the frogs usually make it across. But caught between a snake and a hot place, this is Russian roulette with worse than usual odds. Steam gushing from the ground around the volcanoes is quite common, but every few years, somewhere in the lush forests at their base, something more sinister starts to drift up from the earth. Far below, tree roots are catching fire, sending small smoke signals up to the surface. The volcanoes are turning up the heat, and the forest creatures feel it. There is agitation and tension in the air. Their world is about to explode. Shooting several hundred feet into the sky, the fountain of magma soon builds up a cone. Then the crater inside the cone fills with lava, which pours out over the rim to consume the land. Rocks the size of a church tumble into the river and are melted and carried away. Most eruptions last just a few weeks, each building one of the hundreds of cones that pock the face of Virunga. Large animals can flee, but everything else is swept away by these great rivers of fire. It looks like Armageddon, but this is an area of high rainfall, and volcanic ash is rich. Within months, there will be patches of green, pioneer plants grown from seeds and spores blown from these islands of vegetation that were once themselves active cones. This is the cycle of the volcanoes. The cones that were once the source of all the destruction will, in a few hundred years, be covered in forest and provide the high ground that will give refuge to plants and animals during future eruptions. On some of the bigger and older islands are some unique refugees. Groups of chimpanzees live here, feeding on the fruit of giant fig trees that cover these ancient cones. In addition to fruit, they also hunt and eat monkeys. Food is not a big problem, but water is. The volcanic ash is completely porous. There is no surface water, so on their daily rounds, the chimps visit hollow trees that hold rainwater and dip for a drink. They get moisture in another way too, one that always brings lots of excitement. The cause of this scrum, part fight, part celebration, is the discovery of some large, juicy tubers. The chimps dig them up and chew them for the moisture. They will even carry one around all day, like a water bottle, nibbling a bit when they're thirsty. It is behavior unique to this area and helps the chimps to survive here on this almost completely waterless volcano. Dead trees are reminders of the volcano's destructive power, but in places there are more permanent monuments. Fast-flowing lava splashed up some trees, leaving this forest of 8-foot casts. The Africans called them the soldiers, a fossilized army, frozen in time and space on the approach to the great peaks. These spooky soldiers make perfect guardians for the most bizarre places in Virunga. Clearings in the forest, carpeted with sickly-looking grass. They are called mazukus, and they have a strange and lethal secret. Everywhere there are bones, bones and bodies. Bats, birds, butterflies and buffalo. An indiscriminate killer is at work, one that wipes out anything that breathes. Old mummified bodies lying next to those that died just yesterday. During the heat of the day, we see only the victims, the sickly plants, and the bones that litter the clearing. But in the cool of morning, the ghostly killer is visible. It is pure carbon dioxide, the foul, fatal breath of the volcanoes. Heavier than air, it hugs the ground, killing any small creature. Large animals are attracted to the grass, and with their heads low to graze, they too die after a few breaths. The carcasses attract scavengers, vultures and jackals, whose own bodies join the collection. Only in the heat and wind of daytime, when the gas rises and disperses, is it fairly safe to enter a mazuku. The monitor lizard is not active until it is warmed up in the sun, so it visits at a safe time of day. But the dead snake it can smell is in a depression where the gas emerges and persists, even in the heat. Carbon dioxide works frighteningly fast. The lizard takes a breath, feels the lack of oxygen, so takes another, deeper one, its tongue and mucous membranes already turning blue from anoxia. It is fast running out of time. Wobbling with weakness, it does the only thing that could save its life. It doesn't have the strength to climb out of the depression, but it has got its head above the level of the gas. Once breathing clean air, the effects wear off quickly. After a 10-minute rest, the lizard crawls away. Whether it owes its life to experience or pure luck, we will never know. Here on the edge of the savannah, palm nut vultures often feed on carrion. In the early morning, one is attracted to the body of a young cob. Already slightly affected by the gas, it hops down to the carcass and with its high metabolism is immediately in trouble. Not understanding the problem and hungry, it lowers its head to feed. So many have made this mistake before. And the following morning, when the ghostly killer hides from the warming sun, the vulture is joined with the cob and all those other creatures in what must be Africa's strangest cemetery. So to the southern end of the park, to the great extinct volcanoes. Most of them softly rounded now and covered with lush forests. Like the mountains of the moon, the Virungas are usually swathed in thick mist. Mist that famously hides the park's most valuable inhabitants, the mountain gorillas. Living in family groups of up to 2 dozen, under the leadership of a dominant silver-backed male, mountain gorillas are one of the rarest and most spectacular animals in Africa. The rich and varied vegetation on the high slopes provides them with all the food they need, all within easy reach, so there is plenty of time in their lives for rest and play. Because their food is so moist, gorillas seldom drink. But this group not only drink, they play in and with the water, an almost unheard of event. Perhaps there are minerals dissolved in these pools, which makes the water tasty and interesting to them. Or perhaps they're just having fun. This one certainly is. Their cousins, chimpanzees, regularly eat meat, and any small animal they find is soon torn to pieces. Gorillas never behave this way. Intensely fascinated and amazingly gentle, they see other creatures as objects of curiosity, not as possible food. The neighboring silverback has brought his group close and is advertising his presence by beating his chest. The resident male answers with a display of his own size and strength, prompting one of his females to give him a little hug of concern and reassurance. While the rest of the group shows scant interest, the two males pose parallel to each other, displaying their massive heads and shoulders, their arched silvery backs, and beating their barreled chests in a highly ritualized show. It is all just a big show, but these impressive displays, wrongly interpreted by early explorers, helped give the gorilla an undeservedly savage reputation. Way ahead of his time, the first person to suggest that they were in fact peaceful and gentle creatures was Carl Akeley, who hunted them here so long ago. In 1923, when Akeley was fighting so hard to get this national park created, he camped here in this glade, which he described as one of the loveliest and most tranquil spots in the world. It has little changed today. Like all national parks in Africa, Virunga has suffered from poaching and encroachment, but despite the turbulence of Zaire's recent history, its borders have not been changed, and it is still home to a remarkable number and variety of creatures. Carl Akeley had hoped to spend time studying gorillas here, but after just 4 months in camp, he caught malaria and died. He was buried here, where his heart was. His ghost is still kept company by buffalo and gorilla, and on a clear day, you can look out, as he did, and see glaciers and forest, rivers, lakes, and volcanoes, all still part of the world's most spectacular but unappreciated national park, Virunga.
There's a colour brochure accompanying this survival special. If you'd like a copy, please send an A4 stamped addressed envelope clearly stating the programme title to Survival Brochure, Anglia Television, Norwich, NR1 3JG.